Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first actual facts discussion for Midnight Launch Gaming. Today we're going to talk about lethal versus non-lethal gameplay and how that interfaces with just about every system that takes place within a game. Joining today is Robert and Gareth. Yes? No?
Gareth.
Gareth.
Yes,
That's
with a H.
awesome. And it's myself, Michael, and let's get started, gentlemen.
Alright, so today we're talking about the perception of lethal and non-lethal gameplay. And there was a thread posted on Reddit about this, actually. And what it talks about is how the player reacts to the feeling of lethal and non-lethal gameplay, what are the actual gameplay mechanics, and how can we approach this better in the future. So a big thing that was talked about in this discussion, and what me and my friends talked about earlier, is, you know, there's a lot of times in the game Dishonored, which recently came out, I think, in 2012, early 2012.
Late 2012.
Late 2012, thank you. And a lot of what we talked about was how the dart system is the dart and the gun system for the non-lethal darts, whereas pretty much the same. So you shoot, you get the reaction, they fall, you know, the game counts it as a lethal or non-lethal. And you see this a lot in Splinter Cell, specifically Splinter Cell Chaos Theory and Pandora Tomorrow, where one trigger kills them loudly, one trigger knocks them out. But this is also almost entirely different in the game Hitman, and this works really well in Hitman Absolution and Blood Money specifically. So you get a lot of environmental action, which is like knife throwing and like stoves and stuff like that, where you can interact really well with the environment to kind of like plan your attack, which works really well. So how do you guys feel about it, and how do you guys think it could be improved?
We talked about, kind of before we started recording, a little bit about how there's this problem with Dishonored, depending on your perspective, which is that to get the most out of the game's systems, you are forced to kind of go down the more lethal route, whereas the game tells you repeatedly on loading screens and so on that you should attempt this less lethal route to get the good ending and to get the achievements and so on. But that many of the most fun mechanics are built into that killing through the various abilities that you gain throughout playing the game, so your satisfaction in winning or in playing stealthily is exactly subverting your enjoyment in terms of all these really sophisticated action mechanics that have been built into the game that you don't get to play with if you do it that way.
And you know, that's actually something that's very similar in a sort of opposite sort of way. In Deus Ex Human Revolution, your player was rewarded more, you got more experience for using non-lethal stuff. Getting just a kill was like 10 experience versus a takedown was like, I think, 35 experience. Yeah. So it's sort of, in order to really, get a lot of, in order to get the most experience and level up your character the most and have, all these, all the points to spend on yourself, you had to play non-lethally, which the original Deus Ex didn't force you to do. You could play lethal or non-lethal and have more or less the same experience.
Yeah, this is actually a really big thing in Hitman Absolution that I'd like to touch on. As soon as I installed the game, I was really excited because I loved Blood Money. I played Blood Money on the hardest difficulty several times, beat it, played it over and over again. The new thing in Absolution is they give you the levels and stuff, and the story's really, I want to say linear. It opens up more in the end, but the beginning is very get to this place, but there's a fork in the road, maybe like 2 paths, and you do that, and you do the lethal non-lethal route. But doing the non-lethal route and hiding your tracks sets you up better in the long term, whereas if you just killed everybody, you weren't rewarded as well.
Okay.
Which is right in Deus Ex. And this also, it's really, how do I put this? It's really, built upon in the multiplayer sense, which is called contracts, which is what sold the game and really caters to the veterans of the series, where they say, go through this mission, but only do these couple things, and you're rewarded for either being lethal or non-lethal, which is really cool because it kind of gives a community perspective on how it all works. But back to Deus Ex, it was almost easier to be non-lethal, because the corridor shooting and stuff like that, the alarms, the fact that enemies got bigger guns, I think bots even came in at some point, it was much easier to be non-lethal, especially with the camo ability. Whereas in Hitman, you have the disguise ability that's kind of not watered down, but it's made a lot more difficult to use, which I think is interesting.
I wonder if there's any way to balance that, though. Because if you build a level, let's say like in Deus Ex, you build a level that has 3 set routes through the level, and 2 of those are stealth, and they're obviously going to involve more detail because you're progressing through them more slowly, more interaction with the environment because you're sneaking behind things, moving things, going through grates and tunnels. But then the action route is always going to kind of have a simplicity to it in a sense. Although arguably, I suppose you could say Deus Ex, that's the opposite. Deus Ex that built the action up so much, and the action route, the action kind of linear progression through the level, that the stealth route is dull by comparison. So maybe both can't be done equally well. It would almost take 2 teams. It's nearly 2 games in one, because in Deus Ex, yeah, as you say, not only was the action not rewarded, but the mechanics were just not that well developed. It didn't work as a shooter in the same way that the early Mass Effect games maybe didn't work as a shooter.
That's very
especially Mass Effect 1. That game, going and playing Mass Effect 1 is tough. It's very, very difficult. Yeah. But because lethal versus non-lethal, when you look at, in reality, like you talk about real life, if you're doing like some sort of special operation, you don't want to be detected. You're going for a lethal, but then you're going to hide the bodies, which is sort of what you do in Deus Ex. Mm-hmm. But it's always tough to find out exactly what works best for the game, because it's all about finding that balance mechanically. If you make the game sort of focus on lethality, then that sort of alienates the people who might not want to go through and murder every single person, versus if you make the game really focus on non-lethality, then the people who kind of want to go through and shoot everyone to death, they might not enjoy it in the end. But in the end, that's sort of a subjective preference as compared to quality of game design. So,
and I do like that both those games, Deus Ex and Dishonored, both at least give you the option, rather than a fail state. You shot your gun, levels over, go back to the start. It's like, if you want to go crazy, in the case of Deus Ex, it's not going to be as enjoyable, but you can do it. And if you want to play stealthily, very stealthily in Dishonored, I mean, maybe it gets the balance a bit better, but it's possible to do, even if you're going to miss out on something. So at least we've progressed on a little bit. So maybe there's a balance there. As you say, there's different kinds of games. One game is going to focus, the stealth is going to be more enjoyable. Maybe that's unavoidable. But at least now modern games have gotten to the point where they give you the option. Even Mark of the Ninja, which is kind of 2D side-scrolling stealth game, which has been incredibly critically well received and is purely designed around stealth. You can still jump around and kick your enemies in the face if you want to, and it's not going to send you back to the start of the level.
Do you think? Let's talk about feedback for a second. Mm-hmm. So player feedback is really important. It's one of the reasons why, I read an article on when developing a game, you really have to put in a lot of fail safes. So, traveling back and going places you're not supposed to go and stuff like that. And one of the things Gabe Newell talked about in one of his recent speeches at, I think it was UCLA, was you really want to give the player a lot of feedback. So first thing you do when you get in a gun game, what I always do is I always shoot the ground, see if there's bullet marks and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Which I think everybody does. And so you do that, and you really want that feedback. So what was really nice, and I'm going to touch on Hitman Absolution again, is all the guns had immense feedback. All the guns had really big sounds. All the character animations and all the settings were, as soon as you went lethal, you're like, I'm in charge. This is my game now. And you really got to take force. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you're treating the NPCs in a more non-lethal route, you're really respecting your space. You're really trying to work with the environment itself to your advantage. Whereas in lethal, you're kind of just like, this is my playground, bitch. Deal with it.
Yeah. And that's definitely true. In terms of feedback, it's always kind of tough to determine, just how effective something feeds back to you. Like in Dead Space, when you stomp a corpse, you see the limbs flying, you hear the crunch, and Isaac yells. That is, I know that I'm putting my foot on this thing's arm, and I know that I am ripping it off. But it's with every sort of like lethal versus non-lethal thing, in terms of like a non-lethal takedown. I mean, if you're just shooting like a tranq dart, you pop up, you shoot the guy, and he goes, and maybe he stops, and then falls over. And is that really awesome amounts of feedback? Maybe
No, not at all.
But
no.
then because the most recent like very stealth-focused game I played was Human Revolution. They have a gun called that's I can't remember the spread out word, but its initials are PEPS. It's PEPS, and it's
is that the dart gun or the tranquilizer type deal? Or
no,
the taser?
It's basically a crowd control device that shoots a giant sonic wave that pushes people down and knocks them out, and that. You notice that, but it's still non-lethal, but it feels like it could potentially be lethal because of just how loud it is and the force and the way bodies go flying. So, but it's also, it also breaks your cover. So it's sort of this interesting combination of it's meant to be used non-lethally, but it's sort of a stealth breaker. And that's something that's very interesting, is that typically when you think of stealth, if you're sneaking around, you're trying not to kill, and then you kill one target. And then if you're going like, with little stealth, you're shooting, stabbing everyone you see. And this is sort of an interesting sort of break to stealth in that, it's non-lethal, but you're still taking out a bunch of dudes, and there's this really big ball of feedback in the form of this giant ball of electricity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what you were saying, Robert, about just feedback in a general sense, I think that's really been constrained by the consoles this generation, because stuff like a body being there when you come back to a room that you've left, stuff like a lot of things being interactive in the environment. These are things that are very limited by memory and by just the capacities of the computational device you're using. So if you need to keep a lot of things, like something like Skyrim has run into huge problems, especially on the PS3, just because over time you accumulate all these changes to the environment, and then the system just can't hold them all in memory. It can't. There's no way it can. And there's lots of things you can just get around that, but those are core limits. I think we're going to see, hopefully, as these new consoles come out, a lot of more subtle kinds of feedback in the environment, more not only permanence but more interactivity, and that will feed back into the kind of stealth games we're talking about by allowing things like you were saying, Michael, differences between non-lethal silent and non-lethal action. There's a whole area that you can get into there where you're a person not killing but still being involved in action, and the actions have repercussions, whether it be through breaking windows, which alerts people, and all these kind of subtle changes to the environment that were difficult to do before just because of technical constraints.
And that was definitely something I liked about Human Revolution, is that I saw this ball, I saw people go down, but I still knew that I was keeping with my want to not kill anyone that playthrough, which is a part of non-lethality. You have to, if you're doing a non-lethal playthrough, you don't kill anyone, and that's sometimes
there's a role-playing element too there, because the character that you're playing is the guy who doesn't kill people.
Yep, I was Adam Jensen, the good guy.
One last thing before we round up here is I want to go back to the technological bit that you were going on about, Gareth. Mm-hmm. This was really, for those who played Halo 4, this was really, really prominent.
Oh yeah.
Because
the
difficulty that was scaled up to when you were playing like Legendary and Mythic and stuff like that, the difficulty for the Knights I think it was poorly scaled, honestly, because like after a while you really just like save up like carbine ammunition and like plasma pistols. And plasma pistols are a really, really key point for any like veteran Halo player when you're playing campaign. They take out shields instantly, switch to your primary weapon, bam, you take out an elite or a jackal. How it worked in Halo 4 was they were pushing the engine so much that bodies and stuff like that disappeared almost instantly the second you turned around.
Yeah, same thing in multiplayer.
It's obnoxious.
It's in the multiplayer, so weapons would go away. You have a piece of ordnance, and then you die, and you can't go get your sniper rifle again. You're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
It's so funny that we've advanced so far graphically, but things like that are such immersion breakers. And you can play a game from, you can play a game from 15 years ago, like let's say Soldier Fortune 2 or something like that, where you have bodies that stay there and don't disappear. And I think one of the people were very down on those games when they came out, the Soldier Fortune series, because they were so gory. But that's the kind of feedback. If it was gratuitous, I'm not saying it wasn't, but at least it was like, wow, this gun is having a real impact on a person, as a gun would, and maybe to the extent where you don't want to play it almost. But at least you're getting that visceral sense of immersion, because it's not just a decal on a body, it's like a real impact.
Yeah, I feel like it's really important to maintain, a set of current graphical ability, but still maintain enough memory and such that you can still maintain...
That still feels immersive,
really good feedback. Anyways, I think... Do you guys have any closing things you want to say?
Stealth definitely has a place in here, especially when you consider lethal versus non-lethal. I think it needs to be expanded, though. Once this next generation of consoles hits, I only hope that Sony does something really cool with stealth that isn't exactly like every other stealth game we've ever seen in our lives ever. One could hope.
I think you're right. I think stealth is actually going to become huge, because a lot of those technical constraints that we were talking about are going to be lifted with this new console generation, and we're going to see an expansion of your ability to interact with the environment, which is going to play into any kind of non-lethal gameplay. And stealth is going to become a much more appealing genre when you can do lots of things, not just 2 or 3 paths that have been laid down and thought about beforehand through emergent gameplay mechanics that you're only able to figure out and invent for yourself because of all these more advanced systems.
Wonderful. Anyways, this has been Midnight Launch Gaming, with discussion on the perception of lethal and non-lethal gameplay and feedback systems. Hope you enjoyed this. Join us next time for our next bunch of questions that we'll be discussing. This has been Robert, Michael, and Gareth. Thanks.